Whether you like it or not, age will creep up on you. Listen to what your body says when you eat something. Listen to what your body says when you're working out. There's just no way for them to turn back the clock. I think that's something we can all learn from now.
Hello and welcome to the Ivory Podcast. Today, my guest is Samyukta, a business professional who I have deeply admired and respected over the years. She founded a travel startup called Urbanaut, much to Samyukta's credit. While the world got affected with the COVID-19 pandemic, Samyukta continued to find her way into consumers' hearts with her work with Urbanaut. Samyukta, welcome to the Ivory Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Isaac.
What was the hardest part of being a founder when you started out?
It is truly lonely at the top, even if the top is just you. It's the buck really does stop with you. And I think when you're not the founder, previously when I worked with Puma, you tend to think that the people at the top are just doing nothing, twiddling their thumbs. And it's only when you sit in their shoes do you realize just how much you can't pawn it off to anybody else. You truly can't leave work at work. It spills over everywhere. You have sleepless nights thinking about your job. It's truly like a baby. I think that's the hardest and most rewarding part about being a founder. The way I define it as to whether it's still worth it is I have never woken up dreading a Monday ever since I started Urbanaut. And I think that prior to that, I would dread many Mondays. So it's the hardest, but it's also the most rewarding part of being a founder.
And how have you transitioned from, let's say, living a healthy lifestyle in your pre-founder days when you had a job, when probably, like you said, like work did not spill over to your mornings and nights versus now?
Of course. I think, in fact, funnily enough, I was less healthy when I worked in corporate. You don't get to call your own shots. I mean, you have to, report when somebody tells you to report. And as somebody who worked, hopefully my former bosses think I worked hard. It was hard to actually always prioritize my going for a class or a yoga class or going for a hike if I wanted to. I think that's actually one of the nicer things I've been able to do is the flexibility I've carved out for myself. May not have anything else, but because I'm working on a Saturday and a Sunday, on a Monday morning, if I want to take a yoga class instead of doing a meeting, is something I'm allowing myself to do. So it's actually the first thing I felt that I put aside was my health when I first started, only to realize how important it is to and my definition of health has also changed now. It's not necessarily about getting a workout in or a yoga session in. It's even about just getting 5 or 7,000 steps and clearing my mind. I feel like that's healthy living for me now.
So you touch upon something that's very relatable, right? All of us do fall off the treadmill from time to time. But tell me about what got you to fall off the treadmill. Sounded like it was a lot to do with, let's say, setting up the company. But what was the trigger for you to get back on track with regard to, let's say, having the same health-based regimen that you were probably following earlier?
I think for me, I don't want to speak for anybody else. It's just when you have so many things going on, you have to eat, you have to sleep. I always prioritize sleep. Actually, that's one of my most important. I sleep 8 hours, and I think that's a non-negotiable for me. But for you're working late hours, your mind is racing, and then suddenly you feel like I can't really take an hour off to do a workout right now. So I'll just do this another day, or I'll eat a little less to compensate for the lack of. And then you realize that that's not a very holistic way about going through life. And for me, I get cabin fever after a few days. Some people get it every day. I get it after a couple of days. I realize that I've actually not done anything active, or I've not just stepped out and gone for a walk. And I think that's when, I forced myself to get back on the exercise wagon, so to speak. There were times when I got off for 6 to 7 months, actually, when I was just incredibly stressed and busy with work. I blame COVID for that. But what I realized, and it's actually something that made me realize that I was on the right track with Urbanaut, is that when the pandemic sort of lifted a little bit, the lockdown, I actually spent 3 to 4 weeks in Goa. And then my idea of healthy living was just a very active, just going out for a hike, coming back and working. I didn't have a schedule or a routine. And I realized that that's really how people should live. You should have access to public spaces that you don't need anything more than a pair of shoes. And so for me, the trigger, going back to your question, the trigger to really come back was that I felt it mentally, and so I needed to make sure that I took care of my health physically as well.
How you balance your, let's say, a physical activity need versus, let's say, how well are you eating, right? So do you have like a set way in which you manage your week with regard to your eating habits or your workout habits?
I think one thing that has changed fundamentally for me as I turned 40, so it was about 5 years ago, um, is that you are truly what you eat. I realized and there was a nutritionist I worked with who really changed my life. I worked with her for 2 months, but she's given me lifelong tools. And it's something as simple as that if you're not attuned to how you feel after you eat something, or you have a particularly binge-worthy weekend where you've eaten just pizzas and carbs and sat on your couch and watched TV. So for me, eating has actually been the biggest change in the past 5 years. Trying to just do yoga as regularly as I can, which has been my exercise of choice for maybe the last 20 years, has been the constant. And the other thing that I have absolutely fallen in love with, and I wish we had much more of in India, is space to walk. My sister lives in London, and my husband's sister lives in New York, and we visit. We're lucky enough to visit often. I clock 15,000 steps without even thinking about it, just dropping my niece and nephew to the school and going and buying something. And I feel the difference when I come back. I feel just physically, I look slimmer, and but I just feel so much better by getting steps in every day. And it's not a chore to actually get those steps in. So for me, eating and balancing it with some pretty low impact but regular exercise has been my key. And when I travel, I'm not the sort who sits in a hotel room. It's usually active travel. So there's usually a hike involved. And I think if my sister or my mother were watching this, they would laugh at me. This was not who I used to be. This is definitely something that has, I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, has become a thing that I love doing now.
But let's also talk about the version of Samyukta that your sister and your mother would laugh at, which is, and I think it'll go a long way in helping people find some relatability with their stories, with perhaps something you share. So tell us maybe a couple of mistakes you made, with regard to your eating preferences that you would never make, let's say today in your weekly or your monthly eating schedule. Let's say let's begin with like food, and perhaps we'll also come to physical activity as well.
So for food, I just was allergic to a lot of things, and I just continued to eat it. And actually, I now occasionally eat it. I feel not so good, but it brings me so much pleasure when I'm eating it that I say, it's okay. It's worth the suffering for one day. But to regularly eat gluten when I was clearly gluten intolerant, I just didn't know it. To regularly eat milk, drink milk when I was clearly lactose intolerant. I mean, the thing is, many of us are. And I always tell my friends, I joke that my toxic trait is telling everybody I'm lactose intolerant and then proceeding to drink, a milkshake or whatever, ice cream. I still do that. It's not that I would never do anything. I am not one of those extreme people. But I have decided that during the week, at least 5 days a week, at nights, I'm eating a very low carb, high fiber meal. It makes a huge difference. It allows me to reset my clock from having a binge-worthy weekend. But it allows me to also realize that this is something I can sustain forever. I'm not giving up pizzas. I'm not giving up a great burger if I really feel like having it. I'm vegetarian, and that's been a life choice for a long time. So that helps. I do think unfortunately, my husband's a carnivore. It is a more healthy life choice. It just is how it is. So I'm lucky in that sense. But as vegetarians, we tend to eat a lot of, heavy carbs as well to compensate maybe. So that's been a change I've really made. I'm really attuned to what I know my body doesn't like, and that's been a big difference. And I highly encourage people to at least understand that. About the workouts, you don't stay off your veritable treadmill that you have for too long. I like I said, I've taken 6 to 7 months off and done nothing, and felt pretty horrible after it. I think it helped that I was at least balancing what I was eating. And as you grow older, vanity becomes a thing. You don't want to look older than you are. And so that's also a reason to sort of stay healthy.
Okay, let's move to yoga. I know
Yeah.
it's been like such an important part of your
It has.
lifestyle.
Yeah.
In spite of, let's say, the temptation of working out in the gym and
Mhm.
Zumba and aerobics, you are probably one person who I know has stuck to yoga for 2 decades almost.
Right.
What is it about yoga that makes it the preferred choice for you? Is one part of the question. The second one is, have you tried anything else that even came close?
Nothing that came close to yoga. You remember back in the day getting me to start running. My whole family is filled with runners, but um, yoga is one of those things where I see improvements every week, even though I've been doing it for long. And I think that's something I didn't find when I was just going to the gym. So yeah, you see gains, as they call it, but it wasn't that yesterday. In fact, just this past week, I had forgotten how to do a barrel headstand. Never mind. And this week, when I tried it, it came, and I realized that that's what's so rewarding for me personally about yoga. That you see that you couldn't do something, and then you try it again the next day or the next week or the next time you're doing it. There's no stress with yoga. I get a little stress when I'm supposed to suddenly have a heart rate of 200 or compete with everybody to run the fastest. That's just not me. I find that adds to my stress, and I usually work out to, or I'm exercising to reduce um, the pressure to be the best. And so that's what allows me with yoga, that you always do what feels right on a certain day. If you don't feel great, your teacher's the first one to say that just listen to your. So I think this whole idea of being, maybe that's part of my personality, like listen to what your body says when you eat something, listen to what your body says when you're working out, and basically do what feels good instead of really pushing yourself to a very, very uncomfortable place where you get injuries or stuff like that. I'd rather do it for longer than harder.
And if anybody watching this has absolutely no inclination towards yoga but wants to really start, where would you suggest he or she begin? Should it be just like with an actual expert trainer, YouTube videos?
Yeah.
What do you suggest there to begin with?
Either find a person who's teaching in a studio close to you and doing beginners classes, or somebody online. My teacher's online, and it makes a big difference to actually, the few days that I want to sleep in and I don't attend class and she sends me a recording, I find myself sort of skiving a bit and not doing it as well as I would if she were watching me. It's very important. Form is important. Technique is important. Watching somebody tell you to flatten your foot versus having your foot on your, being on your toes. It's all very important. Small things that are really, really, it's the details that matter with yoga. So definitely go find somebody that you like. And finding a right teacher is also like an art. You might try a few and not like it, and then you finally find somebody who really works for you.
So let's switch gears and talk about sleep. I know you are somebody who's always advocated like a good night's sleep. Remember, you nudging me back in the day saying, definitely, Isaac, you need to sleep more than 5-6 hours. I still haven't managed, but I desperately want to. Tell me what I should do to sleep more.
If only. I'm just hoping against hope I don't lose my ability to sleep well. My mother says that she used to sleep like a baby when she was younger, and then it suddenly just one day it went away. So aging is one of those delightful things that there's only surprises around the corner. Small things I practice is shutting off my screen an hour before. I don't always do it, but I try. A rule my husband has is keep all devices outside the room. It's very useful. I found my sleep improving after that. It's because I don't wake up and immediately look at my phone. And I'm just somebody who never naps, but I need my full night of sleep so that I can be at 100% during the day. And so it's not just sleep, by the way. I also have like this 45-minute tea session in the morning that is really good for my mental health. And I will wake up an hour earlier if it means that if I have a meeting, so that I can get that time. I wish I knew the sort of whatever silver bullet for good sleep. Every person I know doesn't sleep well. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for this. All I can say is that as my parents are getting advice, all the doctors just keep telling them, you better be sleeping, and everything that we hear about people in their 40s dying of a heart attack, even though they were supposedly really healthy, at the very end it'll be like, oh, but they slept 4 hours every night for the last 20 years, and that's why that was ultimately what probably killed them. So It's so important. It's one of those things we all know is so important, but somehow, again, nobody prioritizes it.
Got it. So just again, continuing on the strain of these different aspects of healthy lifestyle, we spoke about food, we spoke about physical activity, sleep. I recently did a poll on LinkedIn in terms of what's the one thing that they should change about their life, that if they want to adopt a more healthier lifestyle. Surprisingly, stress came out as number 2. Like 1 in 3 people among the people who polled, like over 100 responses, that's a decent set. Said that they're really stressed. Anything that you do for stress, like how do you manage stress? And I know sleep and stress probably go together at times, but if you're sleeping, do you sleep well even when you're like stressed? Is that what you're saying? Or does stress affect sleep? And if it does, then are there any things that you have done to sort of manage stress better in your life?
I feel like getting very tired is a good thing to do. So again, it comes back to exercise or being tired enough by nighttime that you are sleeping better. So, I think as founders, we all end up working at like 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock and suddenly we want to switch off our computer and immediately sleep. It just doesn't work that way. Your brain doesn't shut off. And there are like stresses of fundraising and like, how am I going to pay salaries and all of these things that play in your mind. And they only seem to come up when you hit your pillow, your head hits the pillow, these existential questions. Again, I wish I could figure it out, because it's certainly not something I've solved. But I do think it helps when I've gotten tired by the end of the day, so that when I sleep, I actually have to sleep. The other thing that I read somewhere long ago, a travel founder said the best way to stop traveling is to start a travel startup. And it's so true. I have stopped traveling for fun. I haven't been on a holiday since last July, I think. And for me, prior to Urbanaut, I was traveling very, very regularly. Every time I could get away, I would. Whereas now I look at a weekend as a reason to work. So I think getting away when you travel, your sleep is better. On a holiday, your sleep is just automatically better. So if the question is about sleeping and reducing your stress, nothing like traveling. I don't say that because I'm a travel founder. I think it's really nothing like taking a weekend off.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about our parents. I think both you and I are probably the classic, set of nuclear family set, wherein, we stay away from our parents, but, we're probably always worried about our parents' health. What have you seen as a child, change in your parents' lifestyle with regard to their health needs? And is there anything that has struck out to you that's something that they should be doing more of, or something that, they are doing really well, like anything to that effect on either ends of the spectrum?
So I'm also one of those people extremely superstitious about my parents. So I will say everything with a lot of touching wood. My dad turned 75 this March. My mom's almost 7. My mom's 69. And my grandmother's also alive, and she's 92. Sharp as a knife. So it's really about the things that I think that during COVID, my father doesn't like this word COPD, but he does have bronchitis and lung problems. I was very, very anxious about his health all through COVID. And then he ended up getting COVID twice, and it's been okay. But I think that whether you like it or not, age will creep up on you. They are both extremely active in their communities. My mother's always at, New York Times spelling bees and Wordle. I fail miserably when I usually have to go to her to get to Genius. My father is extremely active in his defense colony community in Bangalore. He's like the treasurer, and he handles all our taxes, all our finances. So they're super active physically and mentally when it comes to that. But I think, actually, I should say they're very active mentally, but physically, I think that maybe 20 or 30 years ago, when they were our age, 30 years ago, when they were in their 40s, nobody was telling them you better start working out because your muscle mass reduces after you turn 40, or you better stick to doing yoga so that you can strengthen your thigh muscles so that your knees don't give way. Out of nowhere you might suddenly have blood pressure even though you thought you were extremely healthy in your 70s. So I think that those are the kind of things that now there's just no way for them to turn back the clock. And even though they're so, touch wood, healthy and active and mentally completely there, if their bodies catch up with them because of not having done stuff when they were younger, I think that's something we can all learn from now. And I wish for them that they could somehow get back into, they tried Tai Chi. I think that was really enjoyable for them. They go for walks every single day. Again, when they go and visit my sister in London, both of them walk a lot more, and they're able to walk a lot more. It's also about our cities and like our pavements not being really conducive to doing long walks and running your errands in a more active way. But yeah, I feel like just staying very involved in day-to-day activities and not letting yourself just retire and relax. I think my father has much more energy than I have to get work done. He's a director at Urbanaut. I always joke that like he's my most like my meetings with him are the most stressful, and I think that that's sort of been. I'm happy that they're staying to that. Community matters too.
Got it. Knock on wood for that.
Yeah,
you mentioned something about, like your mom doing like these New York Times
Yeah.
puzzles and crosswords. Does she actively seek them out? How did
Yeah.
she come across them? Like anything you can recall about that journey? Because
Yeah.
that's one need gap that, Ivory seeks to address, which is
Of course.
tell people that, yes, of course, there's a lot of material around physical activity. Everyone can see a video on yoga or walk. But, to seek cognitive stimulation is just like it requires a different degree of motivation. So
It's huge.
is there anything you can share with regard to her behavioral pattern there?
How she
What
found
got her?
it?
Yeah, how she found it.
In fact, she found something called Lumosity. She was playing these games almost 10, 15 years ago. She plays them every day still. And it became a bit of a competition thing, I think, with like her mum and her sister as to who did better that day. She plays Wordle, Connections, Spelling Bee. These are all the New York Times games. I think they're just fun, but I think that it's because she's been doing it for so long, she also has a bar for how good she should be. So in a weird way, she's almost tracking her own progress or lack of progress. Hopefully that should never happen, but she might realize very easily if she's suddenly not doing as well at Spelling Bee than she was just the previous day or the previous month. But when I think back, she was the one to tell me about Lumosity and these games. She was the one who said, let's start getting on a group to play Spelling Bee, and how good we all are at it. She gets Wordle regularly in like 2 and 3. So she's just really good at these games, and she's keeping up with them. And I know there's lots of research to support the fact that that really prevents cognitive decline and being really active. Even if you're not playing games, I think if you're constantly working with numbers or just things that are keeping your mind super active is extremely important. But yeah, that's been her secret, I think, so far, to stay really sharp. And actually, like I said, my 92-year-old grandmother beats us at Spelling Bee. She catches words that none of us see. And so I think it's just a question of training your brain and playing the right games for it. And I think it's an amazing need gap to fill. Enough people don't do it.
That's a lovely anecdote, and thank you for sharing that,
Yeah.
Samyukta, about your family. Just coming back to again, like living into your 40s and 50s. What's the one thing that you would probably continue to do as you enter the new decade, and what's the one thing you will probably stop from here on that you will not carry forward from your 30s into your 40s?
One thing that I will continue doing is walking more and more. I feel like I just want to find a place to live where I can walk regularly and get those steps in. Seems silly, but every time I look at like people in Italy or Japan who have lived really well and long, I always feel like they've just walked a lot. So that's one thing I want to continue doing. One thing I won't do, gosh, I probably will. I don't drink. I'm a moderate drinker. I'll probably even try and reduce that. I just feel like there's too much research to suggest that drinking is bad for you, and sadly, because there's also joy that it brings. So I'll probably switch to just drinking wine and less regularly.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing your story of yourself, your parents, and of course your company's
Thanks so much.
journey with us, Samyukta. This was a lovely conversation. I know it will inspire like a bunch of us, who would look up to somebody like you who's been so consistent. I think the one story that I'm taking away is how consistent you have been at just sort of maintaining that healthy lifestyle. That was Samyukta, founder of Urbanaut, on the Ivory podcast. As you might have seen, heard, She shared a bunch of her personal learnings around the journey, personal lessons, both from her lifestyle as well as some of the healthy habits that her parents have incorporated within theirs. We hope you find it useful and informative, and we'll be back with more guests in the next episode of the Ivory Podcast.